Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
And sorry for choosing such an advanced title.
That's okay.
So welcome, everyone. My name is Claus Pedersen. I am an Agile coach here at Syndicate. And by my side, I have
Skarregaard. I'm also an Agile coach here at Syndicate.
Yeah. And what we're really going to talk about today is Agile transformations, because we have a lot of experience in Agile transformations and we really want to share that knowledge with you guys. Right. So what we really want to bring in is the 5 topics that we think are the most important ones.
Yeah, and maybe you've received the newsletters in the last couple of months where we have touched these subjects, and we'll try to reveal them in even more here today. Yeah.
So that will really be the topic of today. And also a small cliffhanger to the end of the webinar that we will actually like to give you an offer. It's free even. So stick around to the end where we will bring you that offer around Agile transformations. All right. But before we get started, we actually would like to know who you guys are. So we have a few polls that we would like you to answer. And the first one is really a question about who are you actually? So a question about what role are you in? And what do you do at your workplace?
Absolutely. And I'm going to launch the poll now, and it should pop up automatically on the screen. And we would just like to know you, get to know you a little bit better. So who are you? You might be a Scrum Master, Agile coach, product leader, a line manager, product owner, someone with a C-suite title is something. Maybe you work in HR, or if none of these apply, please write in the chat. We'd like to know what role you have right now.
Yeah.
And I can see everybody's very active in the chat. That's awesome. Welcome, everyone.
Here.
Yeah. And you're very welcome to share your reflections or your comments or thoughts about today's webinar.
Yeah. This question is really to know who are you guys out there, because we can't really see the crowd. So it's a bit of kind of who are you and what do we speak into when we're going to talk about the different things.
Okay. I can see that pretty much everyone has answered, so I'm going to end the poll now and share the results with you guys out there and with you in here too.
Yeah.
So of the people attending today, 48% are Scrum Masters or Agile coaches. We have 13% that are product leaders. We have 4% line managers, 11% product owners, 1% see something, and 23% other. And I can see we have developers, we have product managers, UX designers, senior consultants, like different roles there.
Yeah. All right.
Good to hear.
Welcome to every one of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually have one more poll.
Yeah. Yeah. You see it.
Yeah. Okay. So the second poll we have is actually asking about your experience with Agile, right? So what kind of experience you have in Agile transformation. So we are curious about, so where are you on your journey? Are you not started at all and just here because of curiosity? Or have you started, or are you far into it? Or so where are you on that journey? Right. So that's really what the next poll is about.
And it should pop up on your screen right away. So this poll asks about your experience with Agile transformation. So, and the options are, maybe you haven't started or just curious. And in that case, very welcome. Maybe you just started, you're 1 year in, you're 1 to 3 years in, or you're 3+ years in.
Yeah. So what is your experience in Agile transformation?
I've been in several.
Yeah.
I've been in several companies in Denmark where I have been through Agile transformations, big scale, large scale, different companies, but and also both large and small companies. How about you?
Yeah. Yes, it's kind of the same. I've been part of some of the largest transformations in Denmark. Sounds very fancy, right? And also smaller ones. I think the most I've spent in one is about 3 years. I also had the pleasure of doing one together with Paul, a big one, and so also part of smaller ones and also leadership groups at the moment, coaching them on that agenda. So that is also really why we're here today, right?
Yeah.
Trying to, what have we experienced in all those years we've been in that?
And very, very different approaches, definitely. Yeah.
I can see I have some problems with my mic. That's okay, because I'm not going to be talking today. But I will share the results of this poll. And 14% are just starting or have not started or just curious. 17% have just started. 11% are 1 year in. 25% are 1 to 3 years in, and 33%, a third of people here, are 3+ years in.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So
Very diverse.
all over the place.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice.
So what we really want to do is, also as promised in the title, we've made kind of our top 5 of things that we think are important in Agile transformations. And we really want to dive into that.
Yes.
Right? And we want to do that over here. And yeah, you just need the right button. There we are.
Yeah.
So you'll kick it off, Paul?
Yeah, I will. So we have tried to order it. So we say, okay, what is the 5th largest thing about the Agile transformation? And then we'll get closer and closer to what we think actually matter the most. The first thing we'll take here is about the technical setup. Very often we have seen that people are talking about, okay, we need to change teams, we need to change the organization, but forget that you actually need the technical things to support your transformation as well. One of the things we see up here is we are talking about gates that many organizations say, okay, but we still need to have some control over what's happening between different environments and the different ways before it actually goes into live, whether it's a physical product or it's a technical product. And that is a huge thing that holds people back when they actually want to put their product to market, whether it's technical or physical. So that's pulling them back pretty much. Then we have dependencies. If we organize in a way where, or we organize our technical infrastructure in a way where there are a lot of dependencies, then that will also hold back your value delivery in the organizations. And that's mainly because, which also will come down here, that you can't really move forward on releasing stuff. We have seen companies where it maybe takes 3 months to release anything, whether it's a product, physical or technical, instead of trying out stuff and get it out there and work with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's often a lot of legacy in that one, right?
Oh,
what are you
definitely.
coming from? Yeah.
Yes. And last but not least, when we develop something, very often we have also seen that when we start that the development itself of a product doesn't take that long. But then a lot of things goes on afterwards, taking a long time testing what you've been doing. And if you're depending on other teams or products, then you also need to do some integration tests, which also takes a long time. And then at the end, if you have a lot of systems or products being depending on each other, the release product process in itself can take a long time because everybody has to release at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that's something that can definitely hold back your agile transformation, because you can do everything around it, but if your system doesn't support it, then you still won't get the velocity you want to have in your organization.
Yeah. So it's really about, if you want to create those rapid cycles, right? We want to create those cycles where we release often, early and often. It says in the Agile manifesto or the principles, but so, and that's really hard if everything we do requires 4 hours of testing or 4 days or 4 weeks of testing, right? So don't neglect your technical setup, because it is a huge part of the Agile transformation. Actually, when we talk about Agile transformations, we actually, when we talk about in general, we talk about there's a need for technical mastery, there's a need for product mastery, and there's a need for transformation mastery. So having these 3 in balance. And what we see is often that the technical mastery is neglected. Yeah.
And a lot of organizations lack under this thing. So they don't understand why they don't get the benefit from what they're doing, but basically many times it's because of the technical setup is not in place supporting it.
So Agile transformations often becomes about organization, organizing teams, team setups, etc. And we forget the technical side of it, which is really important, because that is what is going to enable us to do this. Yeah.
You guys hang on for 1 second.
Yes. All right.
Are we good?
Are we good yet?
Yeah.
Can you hear us out there? All right.
Yes.
So we'll move on to number 4 on the list. And number 4 on the list is actually experimentation. So we think that the technical setup is important. We also think that doing experiments is tremendously important, because what we've seen in some of the agile transformations that we've been part of is that there has been a kind of try to do all teams at once, right? So certainly we have X amount of teams, they all start working Agile tomorrow, kind of thing. And what typically happens is that if you start up all teams at once, it's going to end up in a huge mess, very miserable. And so it's about trying to figure out how do we roll out the Agile transformation with an Agile perspective. So not doing a big bang, which is very much against kind of any Agile values in that. So trying to figure out how can we get it up and running? How can we do experiments in different parts of organizations to figure out what works, what doesn't work? And that's really to try and create this this ripple effect. Because if you can help one team and make them awesome, what you'll see is that one thing is that other teams will be kind of like, ooh, that looks nice, what they're doing over there. We'll want to do the same thing, right? But it's also from the sense that if you create something in a team that works well, it might be easier to replicate other places. So your experiments that you've done in one team can be replicated to other teams, or they can get inspired by it at least, so they can do it in their way. So trying to create this ripple effect in the organization. One thing though is that we have to also consider that we don't get too far apart, because if we have one team that has just been working Agile for X amount of years and are just tremendous at it, we have some teams who have not started yet, or some parts of the organization who haven't started yet, it can be really tough on how we work together, especially if there's a lot of dependencies between the two. You have to think about it that they don't get too far apart.
Yeah, and that is something that really can hurt an organization, because then you start to build things on top of things to manage that you actually are not working in the same way, and that just, yeah, then you again lose the agility you want to achieve there. So
yeah. And which really also kind of brings us down to the bottom of here, saying, so what is the cost of our mistakes? Because we want to experiment, right? We want to do experiments, but we want to try to figure out how do we create experiments that doesn't cost too much, right? In this case here, building a bridge and a tunnel, and we don't really communicate about it. So it's also, what is the cost of your mistakes? What is the cost, right? We want to make as much learning as possible, but we want to lower the cost as much as possible as well on those learnings, right? So there's this saying about fail fast to learn quickly. It really goes for Agile transformations as well. So figure out where can we do the experimentations so that we learn something, and we learn something quickly, so that we minimize the cost of those learnings, right? And kind of the last part about experimentation is that what we have to realize is we have to experiment, because it is very, very unlikely that we'll just, yeah, this is our Agile transformation, this is what we'll do, this is the setup, this is the things, boom, we succeeded, yay, right? So it's, Agile transformation is not about luck. You will probably not hit a home run on your first try, so you have to practice, right? So this requires grit, so you have to put effort into your Agile transformation, and you have to try stuff out, and you will fail often, right? You'll fail some of the new things you do, both in the sense of it just being new, so trying out new stuff, just like learning to ride a bike, you'll sometimes fall off, but also in the sense that it might not be a fit for your organization. So we need to experiment a lot to figure out the things that actually works for us.
And we have both been in transformations where we have missed sometimes, but as long as you learn from it, then it moves forward anyway. So
yeah. So there's definitely been learnings where you try something out, and also trying something out that was just, it was awesome in that other organization we just came from, and then trying it out in this new organization. It's like it failed miserably, and you're like, what? Yeah. But also accepting that things that work well somewhere else might not work well here, right?
It's a lot about culture. It's a lot about what products are you having and stuff like that. So don't just look at the neighbor company and say, okay, we just want to do exactly the same as they did. No, you have to look at what makes sense for us. Yeah. So
All right. Cool. Number 3.
Yeah. The third most important from our point of view is about the team itself. So when we talk about Agile transformations, the team is very much the center around it. So in terms of understanding that we actually want to build products around in teams and build teams around products, it's really, really key here. The first thing here is about my role. So when you shift from a classical organization into a product organized organization, then very often people get confused, what is my role and so. So here we say train, train, train. You need to train people to understand what is my role, what's the role of the team, what's the role of the organization. So everybody understand, where do I fit into this? We see a lot of uncertainty amongst employees if they don't get enough knowledge about why are we doing this, and why am I in this team, and what should I do to make this a success? So it's something that feels a lot to get that in place, and it's really key to get there. Mm-hmm. This leads into the next one, to get people to understand that working in product teams and working agile, it's not about a process. It's not about that you just want to organize in a new way and you define, for instance, I want to do work with the events in Scrum and then we're agile. No, it's a mindset. It's in the heart of people. People need to understand that they should embrace the uncertainty that we are having when we work agile. There are some things we don't know, but as long as we work on the things that creates most value where we are right now, everything will evolve in front of you. So this also comes back to that this is also supporting that it's complex what we're working with, so we can't plan everything. It means that you really need to embrace that, yeah, we are here and we learn down the road what makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it's really about accepting the fact that we cannot predict the future. Right? Yeah, so saying that, exactly. And if we cannot predict the future, how are we then going to work? Yeah. And it's not just, as Paul said, it's not just about a process of changing the process to something else. It's a whole mindset of how do we work, how do we interact.
Yeah, and the mindset is not just only in the teams, right? It's also in people around the teams. They have to understand also that, okay, we work with uncertainty, so we also need to accept that we have uncertainty in the organization on the projects we're working.
Yeah.
The third one, end-to-end responsibility. We have some people here pointing at each other, say who did what and where I thought you did it, and I thought you did it, and stuff like that. No, it's about that the team in itself take responsibility for the product they're building. So that means that whatever comes in, it's in the hands of the team, and the team fails together or succeed together. So it's not something about that you can say, okay, but you're a tester, so it's you who failed if it doesn't work, or you're the developer, you made the mistake. No, together we fail, together we win. And if you can get that culture into the mind and heart of people, then we also see people thrive much more for succeeding and working together and really move together when things get hard, which it does for every team. So it's about getting people to move together to understand that we are in this together and we take joint responsibility for what we are doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last but not least on this one, so every company has some value streams where they create the value from one end to the other, and there can be multiple, there can be a few, there can be quite a lot. But basically, what we think here is that organize your teams around these value streams. So look at where in your organization you create your value, and then create some product teams around these value streams. So it makes the world for the product teams more simple. It's quite clear who are my stakeholders. It's quite clear what are my product and what am I supporting, what kind of value I'm creating, instead of a team where they are supporting here and there and everywhere. So what do I actually support? I have to manage a lot of people and stuff like that. So it's about making world more simple around the team to organize in value streams and make the goal more clear for the teams as well.
Yeah. And to me, value stream is really also about figuring out what is actually important to our customers, right? And also it can help us with the dependencies, both the technical, but also the people dependencies in that matter. It's figuring out what is our value streams.
Yeah.
How do we deliver to people? How can we then deliver in value stream A without necessarily being dependent on value stream B?
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, let's move on to number 2 on the list, which is frameworks. So in our work with transformations, we've definitely seen a lot of work that happens around frameworks. When people are new to transformations, it's very often about choosing a framework. Right? Do we choose Scrum? Do we choose Kanban? Do we choose Scrumban? Do we choose XP? And then also talking about scaling wise, do we choose SAFe or Nexus or LESS or whatever they're called? So frameworks is typically a huge part of organizations. And the reason why we have it as number 2 is because the framework part is definitely something we've seen help transformations, but we've definitely also seen it destroy transformations. So we really want to put emphasis on why that is important. And the first thing is I really want to talk about is that we have to talk about the difference between frameworks and Agile. And I've kind of drawn up the Agile onion here. I know it's a bit small, but talking about, so what is Agile actually? Going back to Paul's drawing over here about it's a mindset. It's something you have in your heart and your mind about Agile. It is something we do. It's the way we interact. It is the way we act all together, right? Whereas frameworks, if you take the Agile onion, are actually further out in that. So it's the practices. The frameworks are Agile practices, and they are practices that are supposed to help us become more Agile. So they are a mean to getting more Agile, right? And we have to always consider that when talking about frameworks. When we talk about Scrum, when we talk about less safe, whatever, it is a mean that is trying to help us become Agile. So we often talk about the practices as doing Agile, and what we really want is we want to be Agile, right?
Yeah, and it's much easier to do Agile than being Agile.
Yes.
So
yeah. And so a huge considerations around framework is that they're there to help us, but they can never be the goal in itself. Really also going back to Agile, saying that Agile can never be the goal in itself, right? So Agile is also a mean to getting somewhere, to having happy customers, to delivering awesome products, right? So Agile is a way of getting there. It should never be the goal of becoming X amount of Agile. And which brings us to the next one here is really about when we talk about frameworks, be curious, be brave about it. Figure out what frameworks are out there, because there's a lot of great frameworks out there that can definitely help us in becoming more Agile, right? There's no doubt in the framework sentence that Scrum is definitely the most used framework, and it's an awesome framework. I use it often as well. But don't get religious about it, right? Figure out there's actually other frameworks as well that can help us, that are stronger in other situations, right? So be curious about what is out there. Take a webinar, for example, about some of the courses. Take some trainings, understand what's in there. We had a lot of people who are Agile coaches and Scrum Masters in here. So before you set your mind on something, be curious about what there's out there. And also be cross-pollinated, be inspired, right? There's a lot of Scrum teams that can benefit from some Kanban knowledge, some XP knowledge. So you don't have to choose one over the other. Be inspired, right? And then to the last one here, I couldn't kind of, I had to try to draw at least the ring of power and say one to rule them all. We've seen a lot of Agile transformations where the decision has been made to say we do Scrum, for example. And we'll do that across all teams, no matter what the team is and who's on the team. And we've seen a lot of people kind of hit a wall on that one because Scrum, for example, didn't fit their team setup or the way they were working or the stuff they were working with, right? So don't be afraid to have different frameworks in the organization. We have seen it work much better when teams get to choose, right? So saying that it's okay you run this framework or that framework, as long as you support kind of the overall goal, we actually don't mind as much what kind of framework you choose to run in the team level. Right? So there are some synchronization things that often needs to happen on an organization level. So be mindful about those, but also be, again, be curious about what is good for the different teams and not just dictate one thing that has to rule all. Which really also brings us to the last one, because frameworks, so if we go away from Scrum and Kanban, etc., and talk about less, Nexus, Safe, etc., the scaling frameworks, they try to build up a scaling framework or scale up the organization. And what we have really seen over the years in our Agile transformations are that you have to spend more time on descaling than you actually have to spend on scaling. Because scaling is easy. It's just adding another role, adding another responsibility for something, and having a whole kind of hierarchy around that. But what is hard is actually descaling your organization. And descaling to the fact that we can make the value streams and make them as much as dependent of each other as possible. We can't probably make them totally independent, but at least lower the amount of dependencies. Also to the technical setup, that we lower the technical dependencies between each other. So the scaling frameworks, they are an investment in time, and be sure to not make the investment on the scaling frameworks unless it is actually worth it. Right? We see too many companies choosing a scaling framework just because it's shiny, and not necessarily because it actually adds value to the product development. So think about, first and foremost, before you talk about scaling, think about how can you descale your organization. That should be the first thing. If you wake up in the night and think about scaling, is to think about descaling.
Yeah, we have seen several hundred companies with several hundred people where they actually ended up having only 3 layers. So that they are saying, okay, fine, we have some people working in the teams and we have only 2 layers over them, even though they are several hundred, because they actually get so independent between the teams, so they don't need a lot of overhead around them. So.
Yeah. And instead of thinking about, when we talk about scaling, think about what are the practices that we need to take into use. Yeah. Because sometimes there is a need for scaling, but then figure out what is the need and find a practice that solves that. Instead of taking a lot of practices and thinking, okay, now we have these practices because the framework says so, how can we fit that into organization? Then it becomes just for the framework and not necessarily for the organization, right?
Yeah, and also when we often hear companies saying, okay, but everything has to be in the same rhythm. Everybody has to work in the same pace all the time, and often holds people back and actually creates some other issues for the teams if they have to do that, practical issues. So so really consider the descaling part is so important to have in place.
All right. Yeah. To the centerpiece of our talk today is teams and organizational change. Because what we can see is a huge and important part about making agile transformations is talking about the teams and the organization. So we mentioned value streams down here in the product teams. It's also a huge part of creating an organization. Because what is typically different is from traditional organizations are that if we create these value streams, there are some new roles. So back to Paul's talk about what is my role and how do I learn my role, but also to the things around the value streams. It could be something like a security setup, right? That's typically important in many organizations. Make sure that either our product is secure to use, is safe to use, or it is we can't get hacked if it's a technical or a web product, whatever. We're talking about how do we change a setup from being kind of gate-driven, as we have over here, to being more enabling. So for example, some things that I've been part of is how do we as a security department, who is mostly a controlling organ, right? You can't do that, we will stop you, right? To being more of an enabler of teaching, this is how you should consider using security and doing making wise security decisions, right? So how do we, as these maybe previous controlling functions, how do we become more of an enabling function? How do we enable the value streams to actually do it on their own and help them, rather than controlling them and being that bad cop that says, you did that wrong kind of thing? I think that's tremendously important.
Yeah, and it's tough on organizations doing that, because we have had these points where people are making decisions on behalf of others. So to let go of that control and actually believe in that the product teams can do their work in these value streams is a huge difference for a company if you get there.
Yeah, and supporting them, right?
Yeah,
until you at least
definitely.
Are comfortable they might be able to do it on their own, right?
Yeah,
because there's also a journey in that. Because you can't just say, okay, now with the security we'll just back off and don't do anything, but be enabling instead, right? Yeah. Help them to get there, rather than just saying, oh, you did that wrong, you have to figure out on your own how to get there, right?
Yeah, I actually worked in a company where the enterprise architects went from deciding things on behalf of others and said, okay, we need to redefine ourselves. We need to make people collaborate. So they went into actually working on how can we get people to collaborate across the organization instead of trying to make decisions on behalf of others. That was a huge success.
Yeah. Then we have a second one. Something we often see in agile transformations is that someone has been on a conference somewhere and said that agile was awesome, go home and say, yeah, our teams will do that. But what we see is, and a tremendously important thing is, that you cannot neglect the rest of your organizations. It's an okay idea also to start on the team level, but very, very soon you should start to figure out what should the rest of our organization do in the sense of agile. Because agile is not something that the teams will just do and then the organization will stay the same. because then you'll very, very early hit a wall of not being able to work very agile. So you need to consider the rest of your organizations in the sense of what is now leadership's role, right? What is their role now? What mindset do they need to have, right? How do we consider the end-to-end responsibility, right? There's so many things. How do we organize around this? There's typically decisions made by management, right? Also, the framework decisions are typically also in that place. So, but also considering that we are sometimes changing the team setup, but we also sometimes have to change the leadership setup. So don't wait too long to include your leaders in this transformation as well. Because if you want to be agile as a company, it is a company transformation, not a team transformation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you say leaders, yeah, and there are many types of leaders, right? And there are also the things about how do we do HR in the future? Is that the same? What responsibility do we have in the teams, and what is actually happening in other places? But one of the worst things here is if everybody says, okay, now the teams decide everything, so I can't do anything, and people just step back.
Yeah.
And because then you just have some teams who, okay, what's my direction? Where are we going as a company and stuff like that? So there are definitely tasks to do here still, but they are more like setting a frame for the teams and believe in the teams doing the stuff instead of trying to decide on behalf of the teams.
Yeah. Again, it also becomes an enabling option, right? Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
So own your product. When we talk about team and organization change, we talked about having the product teams over here. That actually means that you have to own your products within the teams from cradle to grave. So when you find some ideas and you try it out and you find out it actually makes sense, you can make business on it, and it makes value for your customers in big scale, until at some point you say, okay, we're decommissioning this, is something that is decided within the team, and you have to make sure that your teams actually own it from end to end. They don't go back in the organization and say, oh, can we make this extra thing, or should we decommission this thing? This has to happen in the product teams. So really make these product teams that we have down here is key, and believe in that the different roles you have there, product owner, scrum master, team members, that they actually are able to take the right decisions for their product.
Yeah. And it also goes back to the end-to-end responsibility, right?
Yes.
Saying that if we do not have this, we typically have, I've seen in some of the organizations I've been part of, where they suddenly get this end-to-end responsibility, and you get a bug back, and previously it was someone else taking care of that bug. And you say, that's annoying that we got that bug. So you actually typically get a more high-quality product out of it, because people go, oh, we got that back. So we have to, in the future, consider not making the same mistakes, instead of just having someone else on the other side of the wall or fence fixing the bugs when they come in, right?
Yeah, and also back to own your product. In many companies, you see, okay, we have first level support, second level support, and then the team who developed it might be the third level support. You need to carve that out, some of that, and say, okay, it actually happens in the teams, instead of a lot of other people need to look at your box or whatever it might be before it comes to you. So, yeah.
All right. Next one we have is stakeholder relations. Because what we see often when we create these agile teams and value streams, etc., we also see that the stakeholder interaction change. And you have to be aware of that, because we've seen transformations where it's kind of like, yeah, okay, now we started to work agile in my team. This is what you need to know, right? And this is why it is great for us as a team. And we've seen a lot of stakeholders are kind of like, what? What are you doing over there, right? So you have to consider also that if this relation change, not only what is in it for you as a team, but also consider what is in it for the organization, for your stakeholders. Why should they think it's a good idea that you start to work agile, right? You say, yeah, we are responding to change, so we will change the plan from now and then. And they're like, what? But we used to get this 3-year plan, and we like that, right? So you have to talk about the opportunities that this provides to your stakeholders, not just what is good for you as a team, but also what is beneficial for your stakeholders.
Yeah. And last over here, we have, follow the money, right? So very often we have seen people, okay, we make a plan and we fund that plan. It has a start, it has an end. And that works pretty well in a project organization, plan-driven organization. What we see here is, if you're going to be a team-oriented organization where you believe that the teams actually own their products, then you also make the money follow the team. That means whenever the product owner, the team as a whole says, okay, we have a good idea here, we want to try it out, and it costs something, they already have the funding in place for it. They don't have to ask somebody else, can we get X amount of money to get it? But they actually know, okay, we have these resources available, and we can use them to the very best of our customers we have out there. So it's a key thing. We have seen quite often that people say, okay, we want to be agile, we want to make an agile transformation, but at the same time, oh, we just keep this portfolio office where we allocate the money to different initiatives and stuff like that. And that is one of the major things holding back product teams, that they have to ask every time they want to try something out. So yeah, follow the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about all of these, so this is kind of our top 5, right?
Yeah.
And we've had specific experiences in these, and from some of you who've been here for 3+ years in the Agile transformation, you probably have experienced some of these as well, right? So what we want to put emphasis on, that these are a lot, right? There's a lot of angles into it. And just saying that Agile transformations are tough, it's not necessarily sometimes because it's rocket science, but it's about people, and it's about changing people and their habits and the culture of companies often. I think company culture is very much tying into this, because sometimes it is at odds with what we are trying to do. So be mindful about that. If you're trying to create something and there's a deep, deep company culture about that specific topic, don't underestimate it. Because as you say, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Definitely.
Thing, right? Yeah.
And we've seen that.
Yeah.
Several times.
Yeah. So we've had the best initiatives, best thoughts about how to do something. And then suddenly we realize it doesn't work. And we're like, why doesn't it work? Right. And we figure out that it's actually because there's a deep company culture that just draws in a different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or pulls. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Is it time for questions?
Yeah.
Or?
I think we've gotten to the part where we would like some questions from you people. Right. So, yeah. And Sam is getting ready for us in the question section, I think. We had some mic issues, I think, but we are dreaming up that you have some questions out there.
Absolutely. I hope people can hear me. Otherwise, I'm going to speak very loudly. We have had some questions. Actually, right off the bat, there was a question about whether or not technical setup is relevant for non-IT transformations for HR.
Yes.
And maybe repeat the question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So there's a question if technical setup is important for non-IT transformations, and my answer off the bat to keep it same is yes, because there's also technical setups in non-software industries, because the technical setup could also be about how do you if you have a physical product, how do you develop it, how do you test it, what is the whole cycle in that, what is the decision cycle in that, right? What gates do you have?
What are the agreements you have with your suppliers? Can they deliver fast if you are depending on them? So definitely it can be used outside.
Yeah. And you can also say, Sam said HR, for example, right? Yes, I would say that HR also have dependencies, right? If you want to if you have an interview process, right? How long is that? How long is so instead of saying development test, it could be interview 1, interview 2, 3, 4. Yeah. What is your cycle in that? Because I've been in a company where that whole hiring process was very, very big, but it also was very timely. And that actually ended up with sometimes when we get to interview 3 or something like that, some of the people that were kind of like, ooh, we really want her or him in that role, they were gone. Yeah. They gotten a job somewhere else because we were too slow. Yeah. So definitely for me, technical setup is also important outside of the software IT.
Yeah, and we have also seen, if you talk a physical product, we could take clothing, for instance. They went from 2 to 4 collections a year, and now it might be 10 or 15 collections a year. So you need to change the whole mindset about, if you want to deliver often, you also need to change the whole process around it, and also your suppliers, and also internally. So it goes in many ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have another question. How can organizations tailor their agile transformation approaches to a specific business need or goal? And what factors should they consider doing so? So how do they tailor the transformation towards the business goals?
Okay, so how does organization tailor their transformation to business goals? That was the question, right? Yeah.
I think, again, we've touched it a couple of times. Look at the value streams in in your company? Where do you create value? And when you actually start analyzing your value streams, you'll also find out that there are some things you do that definitely doesn't make any kind of value. So you can start cutting that out. But tailor it towards your value stream. So you look at how do we create value in this company, and start there as the foundation for how you organize around that. Because as we said previously, it will let the world of the product teams less complex. They can take more responsibility, more ownership of what they're doing, because that they know their customers, they know their product, they know what value they create. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, and definitely also don't be afraid to look into experimentations, right?
Exactly.
Because you could also ask the question, are you sure that is the right goal that you have? If you want to kind of go meta into it, saying that, so the goals that you have, are they the right ones? Have you tested out if they're actually the ones you want to do, right? There's a lot of in product discovery and stuff like that you can look into, of seeing how do we figure out what are we heading in the right direction. Yeah,
and that's another thing actually we really didn't touch. You just mentioned the product discovery. When you owe something from cradle to grave, then also start experimenting very, very early in the phases, also where you have cost of mistakes. So that's a part of it. And that also goes for when you try to design your organization. There will be some trial and error. You won't hit it the first time. You will experience that sometimes we made a mistake and then we redo it, but just make it as cheap as possible for you to do that.
Yeah, and organization-wise, I've also been part of a lot of transformations, and I don't think any of them, they made decisions about organization, how to build it, and then they change that as we go along. Sometimes it's because we made wrong decisions. Sometimes also because we made the right decision at the time, and now our organization has moved, and now we need to make it different.
Yeah, and actually that also leads back to when you talked about the thing about scaling and the teams working the same way. One thing is that they can differ, but also one team can also change their way of working. If they found out, okay, this works now, but in a couple of months or years, we have to work in a different way to support our product and create as much value as possible.
Yeah. And thank you. I hope that was an answer for the question. And also earlier, I hope you got your questions answered. I have another question from Carsten. He asks, with multiple dependency across teams, how do you manage capacity planning, especially when you have dependencies towards single individuals in teams, a legacy?
Okay, so how do you plan across teams, especially if you have single person dependencies, right? Yeah. All right. So when doing that, I think it's important to so there's a side thing on that about the single person dependency that we can perhaps talk a bit about first, is that if you have single person dependencies, it is something that you should really look into, right? In the sense of how do we spread out that dependency. And I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with Agile. It's just a bad thing for the organization, right? If you have single person dependencies, then we sometimes refer to as truck factor. How many people just need to hit by a truck before we are in trouble, right? And if you have that, you have a very low truck factor. So lowering your truck factor, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about it here, but also about T-shaped profiles, that people get more competencies than they can cover for each other and stuff like that. Yeah.
But back to kind of the main point of it, saying, so how do we do it if there are dependencies, a lot of dependencies across teams for these individuals? It's definitely about looking into the descaling part of thinking about, can we organize to have less dependencies? That should be your first question, right? Can we organize both our people setup, but also our technical setup to have less dependencies between the teams? That should be your first kind of go-to. And then the second, then looking at, okay, so if we are at that point, we really can't descale it anymore, what kind of scaling practices do we need to take into use? Because we do sometimes need to take scaling practices into use, and that's totally fine. Just consider which ones you take into use. It could be just having it could be the product owners meet to align dependencies. It could be the technical people meeting to align. It could be those bottlenecks that we look at. So how do we actually use the bottlenecks best? And how do we also make sure that we educate people around it?
Yeah, and several of these frameworks we are talking about here, actually, they have these mechanisms built in without naming any and then excluding others. Most of them have some kind of coordination across teams on a strategic level. So keep it on the right level, so you don't, if you can avoid it on an operational level, that's definitely to prefer.
And it's okay sometimes to take one practice out of a framework.
Yeah.
You don't have to take the whole framework, right? Sometimes, of course, consider what are you missing out on, if not choosing everything from framework. But then again, it's also okay to take a practice from framework if that fits your need. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope that was an answer to your question, Carsten. René has another question. What is your experience on transformation offices in relation to how long they live in the organization to be successful?
So transformation officers, how long do they live? And the easy answer, it depends. So you can say in some cases you're never done with a transformation because everything evolves around the company in terms of the market, in terms of the organization as such and stuff like that. So there's no easy answer to that one. What I've seen working is that yes, you have someone supporting the transformation very much in the beginning, but the further you get, you actually get these skills out close to the teams instead, so they can actually start coordinating their transformation themselves at a certain point.
Yeah.
So that.
Yeah, and I think definitely also from the years I've also been in my share of transformation offices, and I think what has really stuck with me over time is that an important role of the transformation office is not back to the value streams. The important thing about the transformation office is to enable the rest of the organization, right? So being that enabling function to the rest of the organization, seeing how can we, if we have Scrum Masters, how can we make them even better? If we have Agile coaches in the organizations, how could we enable them to do the stuff that they might not be ready for right now, but how can we over time make them better at it? And then you can see that sometimes these transformation officers, they grow and they shrink over time. I have been in a few where it has been cancelled altogether, but then the people typically go out in the organizations and do stuff in the organization as well. And I think in a general term, I also say this to Scrum Masters: if you are so good at being a Scrum Master or an Agile transformation office person that your office is shut down because the organization can take over, then you can definitely find work in other places, right?
But it's also like a pendulum, right? So sometimes you need it a lot, sometimes it's less, so it can go back and forth in the organization. So it's hard to give a specific answer to that one.
They last for 5 years. But so it's definitely about the work. But I would also say that the work changes, right? Because in some of I think the longest part I've been in a transformation office was about 3.5 years. And definitely in the beginning, it was very much about how do we help teams? How do we actually make help people spell Agile kind of thing, right? Whereas it evolves, right? And so at some point, it becomes more about how do we scale or descale our organization? How do we create value streams? All that stuff that, all the technicals. How do we dive into that instead? So the type of work might actually often shifts within the transformation office.
Yeah, so it might not be a constant transformation team. It can be that you need some other skills in it at a certain point of time. We've seen organizations working very much on how do we organize both in terms of frameworks and experiments, and then over time, our technical parts doesn't actually follow, so we need some more technical skills in the transformation team. So it really depends.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. I hope that was an answer to your question.
I think we have a last question then.
Yes, I do have several questions, but I do have a good one here.
Yeah.
What is your take on using change management models like ProSci, ADKAR, or Kotter's 8 steps?
So I think using models, we use ADKAR at least something, but it's more of a from an understandable perspective. I think it's good to be aware about that there's different aspects of transformation. For those of you who don't know, ADKAR stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So giving the awareness, so starting with that, and that's also back to the transformation office, about talking about actually helping people spell Agile. Why is it there? Creating a desire in the sense of getting people to we want to work Agile. It's also about the ripple effect, right? Creating that desire in the organization. I could go through all of them, but I think it's a good idea to use some of these change models because you are creating a change in an organization, right? So definitely take advantage of the knowledge that you already have in regards to changing organization.
Worst case example I've seen was actually that the leader of the company went up here and said, okay, we are going to do an Agile transformation because we want to work in value streams. We want to have teams that create values and can work in themselves. And then he just vanished. and actually wasn't a part of it anymore. And he said, okay, now I have actually communicated this, I move on. So back to your question, yes, it's so important to think the whole process around change management into this. But it's an integrated part of it all the time to take it in. So,
yeah. All right.
I think there are several questions, but I can see people are already moving on.
I think we will come over to you, Sam.
Yeah.
Because we are nearing the end, and this was really kind of our take on a top 5, and we would definitely like to hear from you if your thoughts on it. If you have anything you want to comment on or stuff we should do another time in webinars, because this is really also trying to share the knowledge that we have from the transformations that we've been in.
Yeah, and as Claus said in the beginning, we have an offer for you guys.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about transformations this is transformations in general, right? But we actually want to give you an offer of talking about your specific transformation or your upcoming transformation, or however where you are in. So we actually want to give you an offer. If you have participated in this webinar, you can get, or we will offer you 1 or 2 hours of conversation about your specific transformation. And we will actually offer you that for free. And that's really because of our curiosity into transformations and really want to make it specific to your transformation. So if you want to take us up on that offer, you can write an email to info@syndicate.dk and take us up on that offer. And we would love to, it could be me or Paul, but we also have a lot of colleagues that are experienced in Agile transformation. So it also depends on the calendar. It could be some of those as well. And
you also said, Sam, that the material will be sent out. There you can just reply on that email and get in touch with us that way. Yeah.
Because we really like to talk about, so this was kind of in general, we could get more specific if we actually talking to you. Yeah. So that is really our offer that we will, you can accept or not. It's up to you. And we only actually have one thing left for today. We would like to ask you to answer a final poll, because we would like to hear if you actually got value from the time that you spent here today. So we have one of these return on time invested polls that we do to ask you, so the time that you spent here today, was it valuable for you, right? So if you think that it was valuable for you, put it in 3. If you think you gained more value than you spent time, you put it on a 4 or 5. And if you think that you've spent more time than you've gotten value for, it's a 2 or a 1. Yeah. So
I see I already launched the poll. I'm going to speak into your mic.
I'll just get close to you. Yeah,
that's okay. No, just the thing. So the poll should be popping up, and I can see people are answering.
Yeah.
And maybe to some of the people that didn't get their questions answered today, maybe you could book a conversation with Claus or Paul. I can see you have some specific questions out there to your companies.
Yeah. So that's an offer. Other than that, I think we are nearing the end, and just want to say thank you for participating. We hope you enjoyed it. Otherwise, it's too late.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
But at least I hope you got something from it.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to contact us if you want that conversation. Yeah.
Oh, and just to say that the recording will be available afterwards, together with the slides, as Paul said.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a nice day out there.